All right, hey, welcome to another episode of Fight Outnumbered and Win. I'm here with the great Major John Howell and our newest Pathfinder graduate, Captain Emily Campbell. She's joined with us to talk to you about the indirect approach. Now, have you ever had a great idea that you pitched to your boss that went nowhere?
All the time. All the time, sir.
Okay. Have you, okay, for you parents out there, have you ever, seen your child start making poor choices and you've given advice after advice after advice and just one ear and out the other? Yeah. Have you ever been a teacher and you've taught, you're teaching the students and you're saying, this is the right answer, this is the right answer, this is the right answer, and it just doesn't seem to make any sense and doesn't get anywhere?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So, anyway, the reason why is because what we call is most of American culture or how humans just seem to be wired is we see a problem and we go directly at it. We'll see, in the military we have a culture where we see the enemy and we go right there. We find the quickest, fastest way, the A-B way to get to the problem, right to the solution. However, when you do that, what typically happens is as you go directly at your problem, you'll find the adversary come directly back at you. And the harder you push, the harder they push back, and it just becomes a big grinding battle, and each one just pushing on each other more and more and more. It goes the same way with bureaucratic tactics as it does in warfare. So what we're talking about today, though, is a person by the name of Liddell Hart introduced an idea in his book on strategy called the indirect approach. Now, it sounds pretty simple, and you'll probably get the point of it is, but it's genius because few people do it. So what the indirect approach basically is as I described the direct approach, to go directly the shortest distance from A to B, go directly at your problem, Liddell Hart's going to tell you that the quickest way to have decisive result is to take the long way around and come at your problem from a direction that they don't expect. You got to understand, like Liddell Hart, he was a World War I veteran. And in World War I, he became very dissatisfied with what he believed was an over-reliance on blood at the cost of an under-reliance on brains. That as armies would attack, their solution was always more, more, and more. This attack failed, so what'd they do? Well, we just need more artillery this time. Well, that attack failed. So how would we do it? Well, we just need more gumption, more soldiers, more artillery, more. Well, that attack failed. Well, this time, we're going to do it different. We're going to do it more this time with more artillery, more preparation, more soldiers, and again, it failed with a great cost. This went on and on for almost 4 years, and Liddell Hart and other veterans of World War I really advocated there had to be a better way. So post-World War I, Liddell Hart's going to write a book talking about how that was the problem, was this direct approach that the British, the French army kept trying to do and not really embracing this idea of the indirect approach. So, I don't know, have you ever seen any of that in your military career?
The direct approach?
Oh, either.
The direct approach, a lot. I mean, I think back to Ranger School, we had a couple of Marines in our classes. And one thing I know the Marine Corps is all about is that frontal attack, going straight at for the enemy. And so we saw that a lot. And I think almost in a way, the direct approach is part of like our American culture. You see a problem, you're going to go right at it. That's how I was raised as a kid, So I think it's an American concept outside of maneuver or the military. It's just something we do culturally. You got anything to add?
I guess, sir. So I've seen examples of this, especially going to the reconnaissance courses that I've been to as an armor officer. Reconnaissance is all about being a little bit more crafty in how you get the answers that you need. So I would say that this is a great example of that from that experience, sir. Yeah,
and so though I've seen it, people quite quickly understand, hey, I get the idea of the indirect approach, that seems, but, I said rarely is actually put into practice. But before we go forward, I think a good historical example kind of demonstrate this. So what I'm going to show you is the campaign to seize Vicksburg. So good Civil War example of kind of what it means in how the direct and indirect approach kind of occurred. So what I'm going to show you, let me orient here real quick. This black line represents the Mississippi River. These lines here with the little check marks, that's a railroad. You have the towns of Corinth, Mississippi.
Sir, one thing, can I interrupt you? As a Mississippi resident, it's Corinth, not Corinth.
Corinth.
Yes, sir.
All right.
Gotta get it right.
Thank you. I got my Mississippi right.
Yes, sir.
All right, Corinth. and we come down here to Vicksburg.
Yes, sir. I love
And
it.
move on out here to Jackson. All right.
The capital.
All right. We get down here to Jackson. All right. Now, why Vicksburg is important is because, if you're not much of a Civil War, history buff, the railroads and the rivers is what this whole Civil War was about. If you took just a map of the major rivers like the Ohio, the Tennessee, the Mississippi, overlaid railroads on it, and then put the battles, you'll see they all line up. It's because in order to move in those days, the amount of commodities, food, for the animals, ammunition, you couldn't go far from the railroads because you just run out. So all the battles are always going to be about railroad hubs, and they're all going to be along rivers so they can be resupplied because you just couldn't get that far away from railroads or rivers because you just run out of food and ammunition. You can't be resupplied. So that'll become important in just a minute. So in 1862, after the Battle of Shiloh, Ulysses S. Grant decides that he needs to come, it gets ordered that he needs to come and take Vicksburg. Vicksburg is important because this railroad that goes out for Louisiana and later on Texas, this is where all the cattle and food that's coming in from the, remember there's a big blockade, so a lot of the trade is now going through down through Mexico, Texas, and around, and it comes back, go through Texas, gets on a railroad, and this railroad comes through Vicksburg to Jackson and then to Atlanta, then out into the Confederacy. So food and cattle and all that stuff that was so important for the Confederacy is really coming down through Vicksburg. Also, the Mississippi River, by this time, the Union had seized New Orleans. They had seized Memphis, but Vicksburg was still in the hands of the Confederacy. So this whole way to resupply themselves, the Union, was cut. And again, the Confederacy controlled this part of the Mississippi River. So really, Vicksburg at this time was seen as almost the center of gravity for the Western theater of war. And the Union believed if they could take Vicksburg, it would really put the death knell on the Confederacy. So Grant here in the Blue Arrow, after the Battle of Shiloh, moves south to Corinth.
Thank you, sir.
And he moves down to go directly at Vicksburg, and he is stopped by the Confederacy. So then that fails, so he comes around and he utilizes the Mississippi River. He gets off comes up a river, attacks Vicksburg again directly. It fails. He comes back, tries again to attack up through Chickasaw Bayou at Vicksburg again, and it fails. Each attempt, he takes casualties, and he has to actually, some guys go back, get more resupply, and tries again. So each time he tried directly to come at Vicksburg, he was met with failure. But then, in a big, audacious move, he loads up his soldiers on gunboats. He runs the Vicksburg guns, sails past Vicksburg quite a way, and lands significantly south of Vicksburg. And then he disembarks and travels not directly at Vicksburg, but goes to Jackson, Mississippi. Now, that is the indirect approach. Interesting, once he leaves the Mississippi River, no more supplies are coming his way. So it's a massive gamble. Once he gets to Jackson, Mississippi, the Confederacy realize that their supplies, their food, their ammunition has now been cut. And in desperation, Pemberton comes out to try to meet Grant. Grant attacks towards Pemberton, and they meet at a battle of Champion's Hill, which is important for Broyles family lore because my great-great-grandfather fought there, had his horse shot out from under him. The Confederacy lose. Grant proceeds into Vicksburg, set to siege, and 1 month later, July the 4th, 1863, Vicksburg falls. So this, to me, is always a good example of how every time he came directly at Vicksburg, it failed. But once he was able, through audacity, and so he's able to move south, cut his supply line, and then come at Vicksburg that way. One thing that I want to emphasize, though, that really Liddell Hart builds on Sun Tzu's, we'll call it the ordinary force and the extraordinary force. And I don't know why he called it that, but this is Craig Broyles' interpretation. So ordinary force is the force that will go directly at the problem. To me, that's ordinary. Ordinary people typically will go at a problem directly at it. I'm not saying that's bad. There are times when you have to go directly at a problem. I mean, for example, take out the garbage. Pretty silly to go the indirect approach when we take out the garbage. But there is especially in warfare, going directly to something, realize you're going to take mass resistance. The most likely of an approach is always mind. But then you have the extraordinary force. The extraordinary force, I call it extraordinary because it kind of seems that thinking this way is extraordinary. Well, people think that. They will then, as they're being fixed with the ordinary force, the extraordinary force will then take the long way around and attack the enemy from an unexpected direction and achieving extraordinary results. So it's not just taking the indirect approach alone, it's a combination of ordinary forces going at someone from the ordinary way and the extraordinary or the indirect approach or extraordinary forces to get at the enemy from the least expected direction. We'll see that too with our fix and flank, and that's kind of that piece. But I would just encourage you to think the indirect approach is just more than just fix and flank. It's actually not, just like with every maneuver warfare, it's a way of thinking. So for example, I've noticed in my military career, as staff officer, there'll be a particular project or effort I'm working on. And for whatever reason, this method is meeting massive resistance by my superior. So particularly there's a process that we're following I think is silly or I think is less effective. Me trying to go at it directly has always usually resulted in the opposite. I make people mad. Resistance stiffens, on and on and on. But so therefore I've learned that when you have something like that, to find the gap, to figure out there is an indirect approach to go around to get something that you're trying to get to. For example, recently, my son's playing football. He just joined his football team and he hasn't been getting a lot of playing time on the varsity squad, becoming quite upset. He's like, Dad, what should I do? I explained this to him. I said, well, the direct approach would be to your coach and say, Coach, I'm not getting played. What's up with that? How come I'm sitting the bench? I don't think that's right. Now, with him, how do you think your coach is going to respond? I doubt he will say, you're right. I had no idea. You're correctly, I'm wrong in everything I'm doing. I'm going to put you in. I said, do you think that's going to happen? To which he said, no way. I said, okay, so what's the indirect way? How could you go indirect? He said, well, I can control my effort. I can control knowing the play, and I control how hard I hit. And I said, really? I had no idea. That seems like a great idea. I never thought of that, right? Because if I said that directly as a parent, I never listened. He's like, yeah. And inevitably, he's been following that. And I just found out he just is now starting on the punt team. He's now starting the kickoff team as a sophomore. And he's much more encouraged by how he's getting more playing time. So again, just a simple example of the direct versus indirect approach. Really great video. I'm sure we'll show it on this. I call it the second nut video. And it's a pretty famous video. But I've learned as a leader that as you need the indirect approaches as you'll have your vision. You'll have your command philosophy. You'll iterate this, but you're really by yourself. You're just this lone nut spouting off, hey, here's Broyles with his next vision or whatever. Who you need, though, is in the second nut. You need the second best follower. And in this video that we can show, you'll see this, demonstrate someone who is, the leader all by himself. But when the second person joins in and follows, then you get a movement. And again, I think a lot of that is the ordinary, there's the ordinary force, the commander saying, here's my vision, here's what we're going to do. But again, just by himself, he's the lone nut and not a lot will change. But when the second nut comes in, your first sergeant, your sergeant major, a key leader, and they get on board, then the movement happens. So again, what I'm trying to talk about here is Liddell Hart's indirect approach. Again, what he will assert is you win decisively by using the longest way around is often the shortest way home. But to me, it's always been bigger than that. It's been a philosophy I've used my entire life, is try to use the indirect approach whenever possible, combined with the direct approach, and you'll get decisive results. And through that, you'll be able to fight outnumbered and win. All right. Well, thanks for watching. See you next time.